subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. In the next 1 hour, we shall write through today's newspaper, The Hindu, Delhi edition, and we shall have discussion on articles pertinent to civil service examination. The articles that we are going to take up for discussion has been tabulated in front of you, and the time stamping for the same has been given in the description section. There is a news article on page number 1. States can have subgroups among SC/STs, says court. See, yesterday a 5-judge bench of Supreme Court has held that states can subclassify scheduled caste and scheduled tribe in the central list to provide preferential treatment to weakest of the weak. And this judgment of Supreme Court has brought debate on the reservation policy of India to the front yet again. What is important about yesterday's judgment is the judgment has taken a contrary view to the 2004 judgment of the Supreme Court in E.V. Chinnaiah case. In E.V. Chinnaiah case, Supreme Court held that states do not have power to subclassify scheduled castes for the purpose of reservation in the public services and education. Supreme Court gave reasons for that in the E.V. Chinnaiah case that we will see shortly. And Supreme Court also has given reason yesterday to have a contrary opinion to E.V. Chinnaiah case, which we will also see. But E.V. Chinnaiah judgment was also given by 5 judges, and yesterday's judgment also has been given by 5 judges. 5-judge bench cannot overturn judgment of another 5-judge bench of Supreme Court. That is why yesterday's judgment has not overturned E.V. Chinnaiah case. It only has taken a contrary opinion to settle the legal question whether the subclassification of scheduled caste is constitutionally valid or not. The matter has been sent to Chief Justice of India, and he will form a larger bench, perhaps of 7 judges. So a very interesting and important case has been opened up, and this is going to be very important for the mains examination. Let me now open the thread of the issue and explain you brick by brick what the issue is. Look back in 1997, Justice Ramachandra Raju Commission recommended subdividing the scheduled caste in the state of Andhra Pradesh for the purpose of distribution of reservation benefit among the subcastes. Consequentially, Andhra Pradesh government passed a legislation giving preferential treatment to 67 sub-scheduled castes. But this legislation of the state of Andhra Pradesh was struck down by Supreme Court in E.V. Chinnaiah versus State of Andhra Pradesh case. Supreme Court in E.V. Chinnaiah case said that scheduled castes are constitutionally homogeneous group. This is the nucleus of the discussion that we are going to have. This is the central question in your hand right now, whether scheduled caste and scheduled tribes are constitutionally homogeneous. If they are, then subclassification will not be constitutionally valid. If they are not, then states can subclassify scheduled caste to enable the weakest among the weak to get the benefit of reservation. But in Chinnaiah judgment, Supreme Court held that scheduled castes are constitutionally homogeneous. So states do not have the power to further subclassify scheduled caste and scheduled tribe for grant of quotas in jobs and admissions to educational institutions. The argument was that inter se classification, meaning classification within the group, violated Article 14, right to equality. Supreme Court reasoned that the declaration of a caste as a scheduled caste in the presidential list issued under Article 341 meant that any scheduled caste group gets subsumed in the broader categorization of scheduled castes under Article 341. Constitutionally, there is no provision of subclassification of scheduled caste under Article 341. Only the President has the power to notify inclusion or exclusion of a caste as a scheduled caste, and states cannot tinker with the list. The court reasoned that it was the power in the hand of the President to include or to exclude a caste from the list of scheduled caste. And subclassification by the states will be tinkering with this power of the President. So on these grounds, E.V. Chinnaiah judgment disallowed subclassification. For the prelims examination, you must be aware that the President under Article 341 and Article 342 notifies as scheduled caste and scheduled tribe respectively. And the consent of the Parliament is required to exclude or to include any caste in the list. States do not have power over this. So states cannot unilaterally add or pull out a caste from this list of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So it seems like the power of the center and states playing along with it amounts to tinkering with the power of the center and that of president according to the Chinaya judgment. Chinaya judgment was delivered in 2004 and in 2010 the Punjab and Haryana High Court, relying on Chinaya judgment, struck down a law of Punjab government empowering the government to subclassify scheduled caste and scheduled tribe for the grant of quota. This has been done by many states and even presently subclassification is already in operation in the state of Tamil Nadu. Even Bihar has done subclassification. But this particular judgment of Punjab government was struck down by Punjab High Court. And Punjab High Court relied on the Supreme Court judgment in the Chinaya verdict. Then against this judgment of Punjab High Court, appeal was done in the Supreme Court. And the case came to be known as Devendra Singh versus State of Punjab. And this is the case on which judgment has been given yesterday. Yesterday, in the Devendra Singh case, Supreme Court has taken an opinion contrary to Chinaya judgment. The Constitutional Bench of Supreme Court has made observation that reservation has created inequality within the reserved caste itself. The court has reasoned that states cannot be deprived of the power to take care of qualitative and quantitative differences among the scheduled caste and take appropriate measures to provide equity in the welfare scheme of the government. So the state governments cannot be deprived of the power to provide differential treatment to the citizens to provide equity. The court also has taken a very stern position that citizens cannot be treated to be socially and educationally backward till perpetuity, forever, till eternity. The court stated that those who have come up must be excluded like creamy layer. This is extremely important for you to note. The concept of creamy layer has not been applied in SC/STs yet. The concept of creamy layer operates only in case of OBC. But court seems to have taken the opinion of economic backwardness as one measure of backwardness. And that is why this concept of creamy layer has been talked about. I'm highlighting this because this is the core issue in the debate of reservation policy in India. Whether the reservation has to be given on basis of caste or it has to be given on the basis of economic condition. Supreme Court now seems to be in mood of giving reservation on basis of economic condition even within the framework of reservation on basis of caste. And finally, Supreme Court has said that subclassification within the presidential list of Article 341 does not amount to tinkering with it, as no caste is excluded from the list. Only their subclassification is being done to prioritize which group need greater help from the state. In the Chinaya judgment, Supreme Court said that subclassification is violative of Article 14 and of Article 341 because it violated right to equality and it tinkered with the power of precedent. In the Devendra Singh case, Supreme Court seems to have alluded to the same article but has drawn different conclusion. It is not violative of Article 14 because it is a settled issue in law that reasonable classification can be done, and that will not be violative of Article 14, right to equality. And further, the Supreme Court is saying that since no caste is excluded from the list, so it does not tinker with the power of precedent to exclude or include any group from the list of scheduled caste under Article 341. So it's a matter of interpretation, and a larger bench will settle this legal question. There are two things that you have to think right now. Number one, are scheduled castes constitutionally homogeneous? And number two, can the concept of creamy layer be applied in case of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe? Because this has not been applied yet. So basically these are the two questions that you have to understand in this particular issue. In all likelihood, rather it is almost certain that the larger bench of Supreme Court that will be constituted will go with the Devendra Singh case observation and overturn the Chinaya judgment. There are reasons for that I'm going to spell out. There are many reasons and arguments given in favor of subclassification of scheduled caste. If you look from the social perspective, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar described Indian society as a gradation of caste, forming an ascending scale of reverence and descending scale of contempt, meaning it forms a hierarchical society. With people in the lower rung, they are subjugated more. And in this kind of hierarchical gradation of caste, there cannot be two castes being equal. So in the structure itself, there is inherent difference. So this calls for subclassification of caste so that the caste which has been historically more subjugated, ostracized, they get the benefit of the scheme of reservation. Then there are legal arguments, and this is very important to understand. Listen very carefully. There is no legal hurdle in subclassification of scheduled caste. It is constitutionally valid. Look, if you read barely Article 14, Article 341, you wouldn't know whether it's valid or not. The constitutional validity of anything is told to us by the Supreme Court through its judgment, because the right to interpret the Constitution is constitutionally given to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court in the 9-judge bench in the Indira Sawhney case recognized the differential backwardness in Indian society, and it held that it is perfectly legal for the state to categorize backward classes as backward and more backward, meaning subclassification of OBCs was allowed by the Supreme Court in the Indira Sawhney case. But then this was for OBCs. In the Indira Sawhney case, Supreme Court took up the issue of reservation for other backward classes, and in that it pronounced that subclassification of OBCs was legally constitutionally permissible. But we are dealing with the question of subclassification of SC/STs, and Indira Sawhney case did not say anything about SC/STs. But when we see Indira Sawhney case together with Subhash Chandra case of 2009, then the story becomes clear. Supreme Court held in the Subhash Chandra judgment that backward classes in Article 16(4) include scheduled caste and scheduled tribe for all intent and purpose of providing benefit to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. Article 16(4) reads like this: nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making any provision for the reservation of appointments or posts in favor of any backward class of citizens, which in the opinion of the state is not adequately represented in service under the state. So Article 16(4) is talking about reservation for backward class. And in the Chandra Subhas case, Supreme Court has said that backward class in 16(4) will include scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. Now when you read this statement from Indira Sawhney case that subclassification of backward class is allowed and backward class include scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, that means subclassification of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe will also be allowed. So these two cases of Supreme Court has made it clear that subclassification will be allowed, and that is why I have told you earlier that the 7-judge bench that will be formed shortly will allow this subclassification of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe in all likelihood. Then there are statistical arguments that subclassification should be done. We do not have the detailed data of representation of all the subcastes in government and educational institutions. But we do have data for many subcastes among scheduled caste, for the purpose of which a special commission or a special committee was formed to inquire into. I'm giving you one such example. There is a scheduled caste called as Aruntha Thiyars in the state of Tamil Nadu. They constitute nearly 16% of the total scheduled caste population in the state, and Justice Janarthanam Commission observed that their representation in government departments and educational institutions was between 0 to 5%, meaning they were underrepresented within scheduled caste communities. So in 2009, Tamil Nadu reserved 3% of total seats in educational institutions and state services for Aruntathiya's community. So they did subclassification of scheduled caste already, and such subclassification exists in many states. So statistically, it also shows that some of the scheduled castes are more underrepresented. They have been historically more subjugated, and they are in greater need of the benefit of reservation policy. So subclassification can be done, and we hope it shall be done. But there is one thing left to understand, and which is very important for you to know as well. If Indira Sawhney judgment allowed subclassification of backward classes, then why in Chinaiya judgment in 2004, Supreme Court disallowed subclassification of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe? The answer seems to be in the misreading of Indira Sawhney judgment by the Supreme Court in the Chinaiya judgment. Also in yesterday's judgment, Supreme Court has taken the stand that Chinaiya judgment is erroneous. It was incorrect. The judges were mistaken. They misunderstood the Indira Sawhney judgment. The majority judgment in the Indira Sawhney case read like this in one place. We feel that exclusion of such socially advanced members will make the class a truly backward class and would more appropriately serve the purpose and object of Clause 4, 16.4. So in the Indira Sawhney judgment, the judges were of opinion that creamy layer among OBC must be excluded so that the purpose of reservation is better met. However, the judges cautioned that this discussion is confined to other backward classes only and has no relevance in case of scheduled tribe and scheduled caste. It appears that in the Chinaiya judgment, Supreme Court misunderstood the Indira Sawhney judgment to be not applicable to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. But however, only this question of excluding the creamy layer was not applicable to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, not the entire judgment. What the judges mentioned in the bracket was applicable only to this particular para of exclusion of such socially advanced members. So such exclusion of creamy layer will not apply to scheduled tribe and scheduled caste. That was the point, not the entire judgment. But the Chinaiya judgment thought the entire judgment is not applicable. So if subclassification of OBC is allowed in Indira Sawhney judgment, that will not be applicable to SC/ST. But that was not the case. But that's how the Supreme Court thought to be the case, and that's why subclassification was not allowed. But this in all likelihood will be corrected very shortly. So subclassification can be done. You can take it for granted that Supreme Court will allow this. Indira Sawhney judgment also allowed this. The Devendra Singh judgment of yesterday also has made up its mind that they are going to allow this. So out of the two questions, first we have almost come to understand that scheduled caste and scheduled tribe are not constitutionally homogeneous. Now we come to the second question. Can the concept of creamy layer be applied to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe? In the Indira Sawhney judgment, judges specifically warned against this. They said this discussion is confined to OBC and has no relevance in case of STs and SCs. So clearly they didn't want the concept of creamy layer to be applied to SCs and STs. But yesterday's judgment of Supreme Court has alluded to this, that concept of creamy layer shall also be applied. And with that comes a danger. There are many legal jurists who are of the opinion that scheduled caste subclassification should not be based on economic condition. The reason is that caste is a social problem in India. It does not go away with some degree of educational or economic mobility. Way back in 1976, in the N.M. Thomas case, Supreme Court said that scheduled castes are not castes, they are class. Because even with considerable educational, economic or social mobility, the humiliation and violence of untouchability does not cease. It does not stop. Even the most affluent and powerful member of scheduled caste also have to face this atrocity of untouchability. Just to bring a case in point, a minister in the Himachal Pradesh government, and obviously you will agree that he had considerable social standing, was disallowed from entering a temple in the state in January 2020. So the other side of the argument is reservation become necessary to ensure representation in government and society to encounter these deep-rooted structures of caste, hierarchy, domination, and oppression. There is another good reason that has been put forward by many, that power of subclassification should not be given to the states because that will open the door for vote bank politics. Depending upon the political economy, the vote bank base, this classification would be done in an arbitrary manner by the state governments. That is at least the fear. Therefore, one line of legal opinion is that state must keep itself clear from inter se classification, meaning subclassification within scheduled caste, based on economic well-being of some of the members of scheduled caste. However, inter se classification is imperative and a fundamental requirement for our democracy, that all communities within the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe must be adequately represented in the society, polity, and government, so that this principle of equity operate in governance and administration. So subclassification should be done, but now it is debatable subclassification will be done on basis of economic well-being or on the basis of historical subjugation and atrocities. The understanding of this is important because this will decide the future of our reservation policy. Indications are that the concept of creamy layer is going to be introduced in SC/STs because the legal jurisprudence is moving fast in this direction. There is a vast belief in the legal ecosystem, and rightly so, that tiny elite are gobbling up the benefits of reservation. And this opinion is there since long back. In 1975, celebrated and cherished Justice Krishna Iyer observed the same. More recently, in the Jarnail Singh case of 2018, Supreme Court observed that certain caste groups or subgroups have come out of untouchability or backwardness by virtue of belonging to the creamy layer. And the yesterday's judgment, the Devendra Singh case, seems to have been inspired from the Jarnail Singh case of 2018, because orally the judges made reference to Jarnail Singh case. But you must be aware that government has filed a review petition against Jarnail Singh case. That is why advocates in Supreme Court pointed out that since there is a review petition filed by the government, Jarnail Singh case should not be alluded to or referred to or made a basis for the court's decision. But the review petition is still pending and judges are still alluding to the Jarnail Singh case of 2018. Additionally, the 108th constitutional amendment reserving 10% seat for economically weaker section among the upper caste has reinforced this idea that reservation is the tool for economic development. So people who are already economically well off, people who belong to the creamy layer, they must not get benefit of reservation. This opinion has built up. So naturally this will be translated into the realm of reservation of SC/STs as well. And yesterday in the Devendra Singh case, the court openly asked whether it is not unfair for some caste within the scheduled caste to take away all the benefits of reservation. So that would give you enough food for your thought, and you also must think about it, whether the concept of creamy layer should be applied to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe or not. But irrespective of your thinking, whatever judgment of Supreme Court will come, you must understand, and as a good citizen you must accept and use that too in the mains exam. The first news on the first page is this: borrow from RBI to bridge GST gap. Center tells state. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, the revenue of central government has gone down, and central government is finding itself in a position where it's unable to pay the GST compensation to the states. So the center is asking states either RBI or go for market borrowing. The situation has created a kind of economic crisis in the states, and in yesterday's virtual meeting of GST Council, there has been lots of criticism coming from the state government. Central government has said कि नहीं हो पाएगा. There has been large scale decline in the GST collection, and this has increased the GST compensation requirement to the states when the revenue of the center itself has gone down. So the finance minister yesterday has given two options to the state: either you go to RBI or you go for market borrowing. We will discuss both the options in a short while, But before that, I'll just quickly remind you, in the DNS dated 14th April 2020, we discussed about GST compensation. We discussed the mechanism through which GST compensation is made to the states, the creation of GST cess through which GST compensation is done. We also talked about delay in the payment of GST compensation. You must be updated on this. For 2019-20, Center has cleared its GST compensation to the state, meaning GST compensation up till March 2020 has been cleared by the center. But the GST compensation is due since April 2020, and it has been almost 5 months. In the same DNS, we also discussed about GST Council, which is important for the prelims exam. So the basics we are not going to do again. We will only talk about the shortfall in the GST compensation and the present crisis that's going on. Finance Ministry has estimated that the states can face GST revenue gap of the tune of rupees 3 lakh crore. And to get the states on board before the GST, it was promised by the center that if there will be revenue gap for the states, then center will compensate that. So that has become the part of GST administration. And it has been estimated that the revenue gap will be 3 lakh crore in the financial year 2020-21. Center also has estimated that the GST compensation cess amount, which will be collected in the same duration, will be 65,000 crore. So 65,000 crore is there to be given to the states. So the shortfall is of 2.35 lakh crore. Still, it's a huge sum of money. But the catch here is that center promised GST compensation on account of GST implementation alone. Center said that once we implement GST, the revenue is ought to increase. But if the revenue of the states will decrease, then we will compensate that for 5 years. That was the promise, and that is there in the law. So center is saying that this shortfall of rupees 2.35 lakh crore in the revenue of the state, the entire amount is not on account of GST implementation. On account of GST implementation, it is only 97,000 crore. And rest of the shortfall of rupees 1.38 lakh crore is on account of COVID-19. But for GST compensation, no promise was done for COVID-19 because nobody knew it will happen. So Finance Ministry has done this differentiation in the shortfall of GST revenue of the state governments. But to clarify, center has not said that center will not be giving this money. So far, there is no such statement, and the intention seems like entire sum of 2.3 lakh crore will be paid by the center eventually. At least so far, that is the position. But from where the center will get the money to give to the states as GST compensation? One fund that everyone will think of is the Consolidated Fund of India. But there is no constitutional obligation on the center to compensate states from the Consolidated Fund of India. In fact, Attorney General was asked about the legal opinion, can money from Consolidated Fund of India be used for GST compensation to the states? Attorney General has given the legal opinion that Consolidated Fund of India must not be used. Then the question is, how will the state be compensated for their revenue loss? There has been many suggestions coming from many state governments. For example, the government of West Bengal has demanded that the center should compensate the state from the cess that it collects from other taxes, such as education cess, the health cess, road and infrastructure cess imposed on petroleum products, etc. The argument is, why are you looking only at GST compensation cess that will be earning around estimated 65,000 crore? You look at other cess too and give money from there. Delhi government has argued that money collected from GST cess during the first 2 years was in excess of the required compensation amount. We discussed in the DNS dated 14th of April that in the first 2 years, GST compensation collection through GST cess was in surplus. So what center did after giving the GST compensation amount to the states, whatever money was left, that too was to be distributed between center and the state. So center deposited its own share into Consolidated Fund of India. Now the Delhi government is saying that you withdraw that amount back. and give to the states. What's the problem? But center does not want to touch Consolidated Fund of India. It is not advised. And center does not want to share the revenue amount coming from other cess like education and health cess or road and infrastructure cess. There's a third proposal from the state government of Punjab that center should borrow itself money from market or RBI or whatever and then compensate the state. Why center is not borrowing? Why center is asking the states to borrow? But these demands of the state governments having opposition parties in power were obviously not met by the center. Center has given two options to the states. Option number one, states can borrow 97,000 crore from RBI. Remember, this 97,000 crore is the shortfall purely on account of GST compensation. So the states can borrow this amount from RBI using government security linked interest rate, which will be lower. The reason why RBI will charge government security linked interest rate is that central government would act as guarantor for all the loans that state will take from RBI, even though they will not be giving government securities to the RBI. And the rest of the amount you can borrow from the market. Or option number two is that you borrow entire money from the market. But when you borrow entire money from the market, you will be facilitated by RBI. You don't have to do it yourself. So either you go with option 1 or you go with option 2. The detail of this will be released by the government perhaps in 1 or 2 days, and 7 days time will be given to the state government to choose between option 1 or option 2. Now I must give the limited information that we have. Right now we do not have absolute clarity on this. But the central government has said that they will increase the time period of GST compensation beyond the mandated 5 years. State were to get the GST compensation for their revenue loss for the first 5 years after implementation of GST in 2017. So that was ought to last in 2022. But the central government has said that this time period will be increased. Now by what time it will be increased, for 1 year or 3 year or 5 year, that has not been clarified yet. But the purpose to increase the time period is to keep giving GST compensation to state government even beyond 5 years. So that will help the state government to repay their loan back either to RBI or to the market. Now, the crucial question is, will central government compensate the total amount? Meaning 2.35 lakh crore. Will this amount be compensated by increasing the time for giving GST compensation beyond 2022? Or it will be compensated only partially? This we know not yet. But eventually in coming few days, there will be more clarity on this part. So much is the story so far. This interview article is from page number 7. It is titled, Can a Digital ID Aid India's Primary Health Ecosystem? So this article is focused on digital ID and primary health ecosystem. The article has been written in the context of announcement of National Digital Health Mission by Prime Minister in his Independence Day speech. National Digital Health Mission will come under Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. And the basic of this you must already be knowing because this was covered in the DNS dated 16th of August 2020 by Naveed sir. Basically, under this mission, every Indian will get new Aadhaar-like digital ID. It will also be a 14-digit number. It will store individuals' medical records, including doctor visits, the kind of diseases one has, the line of treatment, and history of drugs that has been prescribed. So the idea is to map the citizen's health with a unique ID. This unique ID will also be facilitating the use of telemedicine, e-pharmacy, and creation of National Health Registry. So one aspect of this is to create a National Health Registry with the health record history of general public. But that's not all. In addition to it, all doctors, hospitals, diagnostic laboratories, pharmacies, they will also be given digital identity. So the drugs that they are prescribing, the tests that they are doing, and most importantly, the money that they are charging, they can be standardized. The medical practitioners and institutions and laboratories can be certified easily. and it will make the formal audit possible. This is the basic idea behind National Digital Health Mission. And in much greater detail, it was covered in the DNS dated 16th of August. But the present article is not on National Digital Health Mission. It is focused on this digital ID that will be given to every citizen, and this will be the fundamental basis of National Digital Health Mission. In this interview, the two doctors, apart from acknowledging the benefit that a digital health ID can bring, have also raised many questions, and they have highlighted the prerequisite for such a digital health ID to work. First of all, let me quickly list down the advantages that digital health ID can bring if National Digital Health Mission will be implemented properly. Disease surveillance is the prime area where digital or e-health ID will help. The problem of surveillance we are facing right now during the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. Our integrated disease surveillance program is completely outdated. If you go to the website, you will find the data from 2012. For proper surveillance, data must be updated every day. So a digital infrastructure for management of health data will drastically improve our ability of disease surveillance. Such an infrastructure will also advance our ability to provide free healthcare to the citizens. Presently, free healthcare is provided in a limited manner. For example, maternity tests are provided free under Pradhan Mantri Matritva Yojana. But we can move towards universal free healthcare. But for that, the data of people who have taken the benefit of healthcare and the extent to which they have must be there in the system. There must be a system to verify such data. Digital Health ID will help patients by making their health data very portable. They can access it anywhere. Even the hospitals and institutions can look into the history of a patient very easily. There is one concern, a big concern, of confidentiality and privacy. Privacy is fundamental right in India, propounded by the Puttaswamy judgment of Supreme Court. National Digital Health Mission that has been launched has planned to make the health data encrypted, so it cannot be hacked. The information, even if that lands in wrong hand, it cannot be used. Over and above that, patients can determine the time period for which they will grant consent to use their health-related data by institutions or medical professionals or whoever. And they will also reserve the right to revoke the consent anytime they wish to. So with this safeguard, the concern of privacy and confidentiality will be taken care of. But there's a big but. Who will manage this? National Digital Health Administration that was to be formed under National Health Policy 2017, whether that will be owned completely by government or even private sector will participate in the authority, that is yet to be clarified. So this idea is very novel in the interest of the citizens, but how we will be able to implement this idea, there is a big question mark on that. Then there will be other benefits, like individuals can not only search the verified hospitals and laboratories, but they can also evaluate the quality of the services by giving feedback. This feature will greatly enhance the accountability of health service providers. But this feature presently is also otherwise available. Such a digital health ID will also help in making available regular low-cost quality medicines in case of chronic illness. In case of chronic illness, patients regularly need medicine. And if there is a digital health ID, then the portability of that will be very high. So even if the patient is moving around, he or she can take the benefit of taking the low-cost quality medicine wherever he or she is. However, for all these things to work, you understand by now there will be few imperative requirements. When we talked about help in disease surveillance, we said that day-to-day data is required. So there has to be a system where data is uptaken every day and verified every day. So data collection mechanism has to be strengthened. When we talk about regular availability of low cost and quality medicine in case of chronic diseases, it is important that the digital card that the patient is holding, that is readable wherever he goes. Otherwise, it will be rendered useless. So a supporting digital infrastructure is extremely important. Individually, we can also record data into that ID, But if that is not verifiable in real time, then there is no use. If there is no data collection regularly, then there is no use of such ID. If the private sector is not operating transparently, then again there is no use of that ID. So the doctors in the interview have rightly highlighted 4 major areas that needs to be taken care of for any digital health or e-health to work in India. First of all, there has to be a basic data collection from the primary health care level. If there is no data collection at primary health care, then even if the patients are appearing at the healthcare center, the record will not be taken in the system, and hence it will not be helpful in surveillance of diseases. Second, digital infrastructure must be present to support real-time authentication. Otherwise, in emergency situation, you go to a hospital with your card, with your ID, but it will not verify. So the health benefits will be denied to you. If the primary healthcare hospitals cannot access your health record, then there is no use of all the health data that are stored in the digital health ID. Real-time authentication is not there presently in India, even for Aadhaar, for such a big project. The infrastructure to support real-time authentication does not exist in India. So most of the benefit that we have talked about will not be available actually if there is no real-time authentication. And today it cannot be done because such a digital infrastructure does not exist. Then what's the point? So before digital health ID will start to bring benefit to people, data collection mechanism has to be strengthened and there has to be a digital infrastructure in place to support real-time authentication. Then an ecosystem in the medical field has to be developed so that a digital healthcare can be made available to people. For instance, there has to be barcode on medicines. If there are no barcode on medicines, how are you going to record your drug history? The doctor's prescription must be made digitally readable. Otherwise, who is going to manually enter all the data? If not the most, one of the most important thing that needs to be in place is proper regulation of the private sector. Because there is gross underreporting of any kind of notifiable diseases. In case of malaria, it is found that reporting is 20 times less than the actual cases. For any digital e-health system, we would need the private practitioners, the small private hospitals, even the large ones, to be regularly reporting about their cases. Presently, we do not have any reliable source of information about the number of practitioners in any city, the number of private hospitals, the number of beds in those hospitals, and that is why the government was struggling in Delhi and in other states to manage the COVID-19 pandemic because nobody knew how many beds are available in the hospital. There is no verified data on these things. Additionally, during COVID-19 pandemic, many of the private hospitals have charged their patients exorbitantly high amount. If this is not checked, then even though you have everything in place, still the aim of providing effective low-cost healthcare to citizens will not be achieved. There is no standardization in the medical health with respect to quality of service and the money to be charged accordingly. Clinical Establishment Act 2010 that aimed at standardizing things is yet to be fully implemented. The state governments are not implementing the provision of the act. The standards on many healthcare has not been notified yet. So if these things does not happen, then there is no way that the primary healthcare will be improved using any digital health ID. Then there is question of legal changes that is a prerequisite. The Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 is still a bill. It has not become an act yet. And in absence of a strong legal protection, there is a high risk to the health data of patients. If such data lands into wrong hands, then that could be disastrous. Even if simple data regarding diabetes lands in the hands of employers, then the patient will never be hired by the employer. If the data regarding AIDS are leaked, then imagine the kind of discrimination that the patient has to face. So sound legal backing has to be there, which is absent presently. All in all, a lot needs to be done for this National Digital Health Mission to be successful. Otherwise, just like Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, this will also not be a great success. The interview article also offers a case study. The case study is regarding UK's National Health Service that was started by UK in 2005. This National Health Service of UK had similar mission as we are having under National Digital Health Mission to basically create electronic health record system with the aim of a centralized electronic health record by 2010 so that the service can be availed anywhere and there is high portability. So a massive step was taken by many hospitals to acquire the digital health record and develop electronic patients record systems. So many hospitals did that on localized level, but there was no national healthcare information exchange, meaning data cannot be exchanged among the hospitals and there is no way to verify in real time. Individually hospitals can do, and this is being done in India as well. If you go to any super specialty hospital, on your first visit they'll give you a card, and that card will record every visit and your entire medical history concerning that hospital. But that is not portable. You can't take the same card and go to other super specialty hospital in India. Forget about the primary hospitals. Then there is very, very limited use of that. Unless we have national healthcare information exchange, things are not going to work. And it didn't work in UK. The program was ultimately dismantled. They simply wasted the taxpayer money of the tune of £12 billion. This digital infrastructure for exchange of information at national level is absent in India. And if we go to the same path, then we will end up with the same result. Now we shall do the summary of news that we have done so far through mind maps. In the first article, we talked about subclassification of scheduled caste. We saw that in the Chinaya case of 2004, Supreme Court disallowed the subclassification of scheduled caste. Supreme Court contended that scheduled castes are constitutionally homogeneous group and the states do not have the power to further subclassify scheduled caste and scheduled tribe for the purpose of reservation in public services or the educational institutions, because this will be violative of Article 14, right to equality of the members of scheduled caste. And also Article 341 provides only one broad category. So constitutionally, there is no subdivision of scheduled caste. Additionally, this is the power of the president to add or to remove any group from the list of scheduled caste. So states doing subclassification will be tinkering with this power of the president. Based on 2004 Chinaya case, the Punjab High Court in 2010 struck down a law of the Punjab government that intended to subclassify scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. Then against this judgment of Punjab High Court, the case went for an appeal to the Supreme Court, came to be known as Devendra Singh case. The judgment of Devendra Singh case came yesterday. Supreme Court made observation that the 2004 verdict of the Chinaya case was not correctly decided. And the judgment said that states can give preferential treatment by subclassifying scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. But both the Devendra Singh judgment and Chinaya judgment was given by 5-judge bench. To settle this legal question of subclassification of SC/STs, a larger bench will have to be formed. But we saw the reason to subclassify SCs. As has been pointed by Dr. Ambedkar, Indian society is a gradation of caste. In any gradation hierarchy, two castes cannot be the same. So a reasonable classification within the ambit of Article 14 must be done. In the Indra Sawhney judgment, Supreme Court allowed subclassification of backward classes. And in the Subhash Chandra case in 2009, Supreme Court declared that the term backward classes in Article 16(4) includes SC/STs. That means subclassification can be done for SC/STs as well. Then there are statistical evidence that certain communities within scheduled caste are more underrepresented than rest of them. For example, Aruntathiyars in Tamil Nadu are nearly 16% of total SC population. But their representation in educational institutions and government offices is around 0 to 5%. So subclassification should be done, but the manner and the way it should be done, that is questionable. And the critical question is, are you going to apply the test of creamy layer while subclassifying the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe as well? Because in the Indra Sawhney case, judges warned against doing it. As it's well documented fact that even with economic mobility, the violence of untouchability does not stop. So reservation seems to be necessary to fight this caste hierarchy, domination and oppression. So this question of subclassification is mostly settled in law. Using Indraswamy judgment and Subhash Chandra case, you can say that. The question which is left unanswered, what is the purpose of reservation? That will decide whether creamy layer test will be applied to SCs, STs or not. If the purpose is poverty alleviation, then obviously you have to remove the creamy layer, as has been asked in the Jarnail Singh case of Supreme Court of 2018. But if the purpose of reservation is recognition of atrocities, humilities and violence faced by SCs, then the test of creamy layer will not be applied. The test will be these: whether there are atrocities, humiliation, violence still faced by them. The second article we did was on GST compensation. To allay the fear of revenue loss by the state, Center guaranteed compensation for the revenue loss for first 5 years after implementation of GST. And for that purpose, Center levy compensation cess, and it is levied on luxury and sin goods. For the first 2 years, GST cess collection was higher than the compensation that was to be given to the states. And even after that, it was manageable. But during COVID-19 and the lockdown and the consequential economic slowdown, there is a crisis-like situation. Finance Ministry has estimated that the revenue loss to the state will be around rupees 3 lakh crore compared to the normal years. And based upon the previous data of growth of GST revenue collection, the center has estimated that rupees 65,000 crore will be collected by GST compensation cess. But that still leaves us with rupees 2.35 lakh crore of revenue loss by the states. But the Finance Ministry has made a differentiation, saying that rupees 97,000 crore is on account of GST implementation. In other words, in absence of COVID-19, if GST would have been implemented, everything would have been normal, then the revenue lost to the state would have been only 97,000 crore. So the rest of rupees 1.38 lakh crore is on account of COVID-19. During the recent virtual GST Council meeting, many states have demanded for compensation through alternative means. For instance, the center can use other cess like education and health cess, road and infrastructure cess for compensation. If enough money is not coming from the compensation cess, then use other cess. There also has been demand to use the money in the Consolidated Fund of India. But Attorney General has given the legal opinion of not touching Consolidated Fund of India. Some of the states like Punjab also has demanded that center itself borrow money from the market and give the compensation to the states. But rejecting these demands, center has given two options to the states. Option number 1 is to borrow rupees 97,000 crore from RBI, meaning the revenue loss on account of GST compensation. This amount you borrow from RBI, money will be given to the states on GSEC linked interest rate, and rest of the money can be borrowed from market. Option number 2 is to borrow entire money from the market. But for borrowing the entire money from the market, RBI will facilitate the states. Apart from this, it also has been announced that the GST compensation period will be extended beyond 2022, so that compensation can be given to the states so that the loan the states will be taking can be returned. But the question is, how long after 2022 will the compensation period be extended? And the crucial question is, will center compensate the entire revenue shortfall of the state, which is estimated to be around rupees 3 lakh crore? We did the third article on digital health ID. We saw many advantages of digital health ID. For example, disease surveillance. Free healthcare can be facilitated and better implemented using digital health ID. Patients will have very easy access to the past health records. And National Digital Health Mission has the provision of encryption and consent taken from the patient to give data to any institution or medical practitioner. So this will ensure that confidentiality and privacy of the patients will be respected. Digital health ID will not be given only to patients but also to institutions, medical professionals, laboratories, testing centers. So record also will be maintained of service provided by the health professionals. So it will create more accountability in the medical profession. Also, in case of chronic diseases, availability of regular, low cost and quality medicine can be ensured. But for all these things to happen, we saw that there will be certain prerequisite. Prerequisite like data collection should be strengthened from the primary healthcare centers. There must be a digital infrastructure to support the real-time authentication of digital ID. If that is not there, then everything will be useless. There has to be a complete ecosystem for digital healthcare. For instance, there must be barcode on the medicines. The prescription given by the doctors should be digitally readable. Otherwise, manually putting the entire data will be a Herculean task. There is also a question on privacy because the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 has not been enacted yet. And without a regulatory environment for the private sector, it is highly doubtful that such an initiative will actually be implemented because there is gross underreporting of any kind of notifiable diseases from the private medical institutions. So when we talk about disease surveillance, actually that will not happen because data collection mechanism has not been strengthened from private healthcare centers. There is no reliable source of information on number of private hospitals, number of private practitioners in the city, number of beds in these private hospitals, and the government faced problem in management of COVID-19 because of non-availability of these data. There is no standardization of pricing or quality of service in the private medical sector. However, Clinical Establishment Act 2010 provides for standardization. So the question is, will this act be properly implemented before we are talking about digital healthcare? Without increasing public health expenditure, is it possible to achieve the infrastructure that we have talked about? And on the administrative front, the National Digital Health Authority, that the National Health Policy 2017 has been talked about, how will be it administered? Who will head it? Will it function as a public sector unit? Will there also be private participation? These are very crucial questions, and the answer to these questions will decide whether we are going to benefit from digital health ID. Now I'll ask few simple questions from what we have discussed so far. Try to decide on your answer before I give out the answer for you. Indira Sawhney judgment allowed SC/ST subclassification. True or false? We have seen that Indira Sawhney judgment allowed for OBC subclassification into backward or more backward. It did not allow SC/ST subclassification. But subclassification of SC/ST can be derived from Indira Sawhney case if that is seen in conjugation with Subhash Chandra case. Because in Subhash Chandra case, Supreme Court said that for the purpose of Article 16(4), backward classes would include scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So this is statement that Indira Sawhney judgment allowed for SC/ST subclassification will be incorrect. Indira Sawhney judgment did not discuss SC/ST. Supreme Court in Jarnail Singh case observed that certain caste groups or subgroups have come out of untouchability or backwardness by virtue of belonging to the creamy layer. This is absolutely correct statement, and central government has filed a review petition for Jarnail Singh case 2018, which is pending. But what is important here to understand is yesterday's Devendra Singh case of Supreme Court, where Supreme Court seems to be making its mind to include creamy layer in SC/ST as well, has been inspired by Jarnail Singh case. So this is a correct statement. Now let me ask some trivia regarding scheduled castes in India. A caste notified as scheduled caste in one state may not be a scheduled caste in another state. This is absolutely correct statement. The declaration of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe in India are done state-wise. It is true both for SC and ST. Now answer this question. No community has been specified as scheduled caste in Arunachal Pradesh and Nagaland, and also in Andaman and Nicobar Islands and Lakshadweep Island. See, this is a factual statement and this is correct. States can declare their own list of scheduled caste for the purpose of reservation in education because states can legislate on the subject of education. Think about it and then answer. See, this is precisely the argument that the state of Andhra Pradesh put forward during the hearing of E.V. Chinnaya case. But this argument was not taken by the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court asserted that this declaration of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe is the right of the president, and state doing any subclassification will be tinkering with this right of the president. Although E.V. Chinnaya case is about to be overturned, But you have to know that state has no right in declaring the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So this statement is incorrect. Now, GST compensation can be given from Consolidated Fund of India as per the Central GST Act 2017. This is an incorrect statement. We have seen during the course of discussion that GST compensation cess is levied for GST compensation, but there is no constitutional or legal obligation for the center to compensate the state from Consolidated Fund of India. So the statement is incorrect. All the decisions at GST Council must be taken by consensus. See, there is must here. This is an extreme statement. Extreme statements are incorrect in 98% cases in the prelims exam. GST Council in general take decision by consensus, but as you know what happened yesterday, state demanded something else, but the center did not adhere to the demand of the states in terms of GST compensation. So clearly the decision was not taken by consensus, and there is no foundation like this that decision has to be taken by consensus. This is an incorrect statement. National Digital Health Mission architecture by default will ensure that health data is encrypted. Patients can determine the time period for which they grant consent, and they can also revoke consent anytime they wish to. National Digital Health Mission has been launched on 15th of August 2020. And this is one very important feature of National Digital Health Mission regarding encryption and consent. This is factual statement and this is correct. Now see this. There is no legislation in India for regulation of private medical services. This cannot be true, obviously. This is incorrect statement. There are many legislation through which the government can regulate the private medical service providers. But we did one specifically during the course of discussion. And that was Clinical Establishments Act 2010. This aims to put forward standards for medical services, but many states have not implemented the legislation. So the statement is incorrect. I'll ask one question from one news that appeared on page number 1 in today's newspaper. The news is that 5 members of Great Andaman tribe test positive. All of them have been quarantined, and it appears that situation is under control. Great Andamanis are extremely threatened. They count only 74 presently. Let me ask a related question on tribes of Andaman. The tribes of Andaman, Zarawas, North Sentinelese, Great Andamanis, Onges and Shompen are all particularly vulnerable tribal group. True or false? The statement is true. It's factual and it's true. You have to remember that Nicobaris are not particularly vulnerable tribal group, but these 5 tribes of Andaman are. Now we shall do question for the day. Yesterday's question was, India has ratified which of the following outer space treaties? The Moon Agreement of 1979, the Outer Space Treaty 1967, the Liability Convention of 1975. India has signed all 3, but India has not ratified the first. So answer would be option C, 2 and 3 only. The question for today is this. Which of the following judgment of Supreme Court has bearing on reservation policy of India? Indira Sawhney versus Union of India case, Jarnail Singh case, Subhash Chandra case of 2009. 1 only, 1 and 2 only, 2 and 3 only, 1, 2 and 3. With this we have come to the end of the session for today. Thank you very much for being with me and do not forget to solve the DNS quiz.